the university is where the poisoning starts. I've said this from day one. You have a population of people who are trained in promoting insane demonic ideology. They go like moths to a flame to where those positions are made for them. And once they're there, they know what their job is and they know how to get in under the radar.
So Michael Malice recently went on the Prager U podcast to talk about the problem with government education and really why all government schools should be abolished. But he also gets into the problem with government monopolies on various other sectors in general. And if it's not clear, he's wearing attire that makes him look like Dennis Prager, just as kind of a gag. It's something that Malice does a lot. But I can't wait to hear this conversation, so let's watch and let's react.
Yeah, I mean, I'd lean into this even further when it comes to education. Parents are told that they should not teach their kids anything because they don't have a master's degree in education, right. But sit down with these teachers that are supposedly the experts and realize that many of them know less than you as a parent.
But that's the same model for security. Everyone listening to this knows that they would rather have a gun handy than a cop 5 minutes away. God forbid something happens in their house. This is the only person that can provide security for yourself and your family is you. This is not some crazy anarchist view. Every conservative increasingly has come to understand this.
So you would say the parallel of my observation from the world of education, which is the parent can do better than any expert for their child. You would apply that across the board to all the other institutions.
Right. And if the parent can't do it themselves, which is often the case, wouldn't it be better to get a tutor or someone in the neighborhood? Let's pull our resources together than just hope for someone that, Barack Obama appointed.
And this is so true too. Security is one of those things that a lot of people say, well, you can't just have private security. The government has to exist to provide security and law enforcement, security services in general. But Malice makes a good point here. And this is so true that even when the government kind of claims a monopoly on terms of security and its modern law enforcement apparatus, people still choose to purchase guns and go through firearm safety in record numbers. And you can see it stretched out to the corporate world too. All these corporations have their own private security teams. They can't rely on local police to be there and stop violence in an efficient manner. So this is one of those areas where people say that the government has to exist for it. Yet even when the government tries to corner that market, private individuals step in and try to solve the problems that are created by government monopolies. And the same thing is true with schools.
So what would you do? I'm assuming you would say yes on dismantling Department of Education.
Well, that's an understatement, yes.
So what would
I would in favor of dismantling the employees.
Right. So then what would you do after? What does that look like? How do we educate young Americans?
Oh, I thought you meant the guillotines. How do we educate young Americans? First of all, it is insane to me. Like this, let me tell, a lot of times we'll get ideas in our head and we've had them our whole lives. And then you stop and question and you're like, what? And I'll give you like a very funny, non-political example. When I was like 5, there was like a little period of time I really liked washing dishes. I thought I was a grown-up, whatever. And my mom said to me, she goes, careful that you rinse that dishwashing liquid off. It's poisonous, you get really sick. And I'm like, okay. Then I, being a guy, I stopped washing dishes. And when I was in college, my friend came over my house. She ate something. She was very polite. She started rinsing it off. And I said to her, oh, make sure you rinse that off. I don't want to get sick. And I'll never forget this. She stops at the sink, pauses, and she's like, how do I talk to him? She turns to me, she goes, don't you think of all the things that they make poisonous, this is the one thing they wouldn't? And I stopped and I'm like, wait a minute. First of all, the ceramic is not porous. Second, it has a taste. Third of all, how much are you going to ingest anyway? And fourth of all, you can drink the whole bottle of Joy and you'll be fine. It's non-toxic at all. And I asked my mom why she said this and she's like, I don't remember this. I have no idea. The fact that we all go to school at the same time and have to sit in a chair for the same amount of time and all learn at the same time. Everyone watching this knows you have certain skills that you're better at. Maybe you're great at math. Maybe I'm better at woodworking. I don't know. We all have to learn at the same rate, the same exact thing. It makes absolutely no sense. The entire education, and when you stop and point that out, you're like, yeah, why are we all learning at the same rate at the same hours? It makes no sense because it's the Prussian model. The idea was, this came over in the late 1800s, early 1900s, we're going to create a nation of little soldiers or the equivalent little factory workers so everyone will be a cog in a machine. It is designed not to educate, but to break the spirits of young children, especially independent thinkers. And that's why I always say that government schools are literal prisons for children, and the only place many people will ever experience violence in their lifetimes. Some parents be like, it's a good thing that you learn, if you're trapped in a school with your bully or someone you hate.
To socialize.
Right. But it's like, there's no other place anywhere as an adult where if I really hate you, I have to be locked in a situation with you. If it's a job, I can quit or I try to get you fired. There's no other situation. That's not a good lesson to learn. That's a terrible lesson to learn.
It's absolutely true. Government schools are there to drive conformity and collectivism, and it is based on the Prussian model created during kind of an era of nationalism in Prussia, where it's now Germany, essentially where kids' parents would be off at war. The fathers would be off at war much of the time, fighting for whatever twisted cause of the Prussian leaders at that point, and the kids would be forced to endure these school systems, not for learning, but to pass the time, to force compliance, to drive nationalism, and that influence has stuck with us today. If you believe that government doesn't generally solve problems, there's no bigger conflict of interest than the government monopoly on education. Because inevitably, kids that go through those curriculums will learn that the government is responsible for solving essentially all of life's problems. And anyone that dares to suggest otherwise is, a conspiracy theorist. That was my experience in public schools, which are more wisely called government schools.
Yeah, there's no other situation where you're only hanging out with people who are exactly your age every single day, right? That's why so many kids can't talk to grown-ups.
Great point.
Where if they're homeschooled, they can talk to people of all ages, right?
This you triggered me, because coming from Brooklyn, we're taught this idea that homeschooled kids are all freaks and weirdos. Yeah. And then I met some, and to have a conversation with a child who is confident and respectful, like they know you're the adult, they're the kid, but they're eager to learn. Government schools are the best way to get kids to hate reading and learning. You meet these homeschool kids, they want to talk to you about, I learned about the seashells, I learned about clouds. They can't wait to tell.
Curious.
They're curious and they're excited. And these are the kids who going to a museum would be fun, whereas government schools, it's punishment. So the lie about homeschooling kids is something that fills me with such a sense of rage, I can't even talk.
Yeah, most entrepreneurs would rather hire a homeschool kid, knowing that they have discernment and independence and
the
all
independence is the big one, because it's like, if I'm like, okay, I need this done by Wednesday, and on Wednesday they have a perfect paper for me, it's a miracle. Right. Reliability is the best thing people can compete on.
Independence and entrepreneurialism is, those two things are two of the primary maxims of the American spirit, really since its inception, that these American ruffians were always independent from what was happening in Britain, and that kind of rattled through the culture in general. But the public school system that exists today suffers from removing those propensities and those kind of impulses that are so intertwined into the American spirit that it's like apple pie. But when you're all learning at the same rate, in the same kind of locked, government-owned prison, you can't experience the same kind of things that will make you succeed in the entrepreneurial world.
Did your parents know that when they didn't want to send you to government school as a kid, when they came from Ukraine?
They knew. Oh, yes.
They knew that government schools would be a problem?
Yes.
Or they just distrusted government so much?
No, they knew government schools would be a problem, especially in New York City. And they were right.
Because they were not religious, but they sent you to Orthodox religious school.
Right.
And what was that like for you?
Well, it was very funny because, I recently I went to Yeshiva Flatbush till 4th grade. And I recently ran into a friend of mine from 1st grade, we reconnected, Rena. And I had to pretend that I was religious, that we kept kosher at home, at school. And it was interesting because we just came off the boat from Russia, right? There's no religion in Russia. It's illegal. So they knew this in the administration. So I asked Rena, and I'm like, did they know I was like putting on a front and look the other way? Or did they believe it? Or maybe they thought, okay, he's like,
he'll get there.
He'll get there, right? And she goes, I don't know. And we asked her mom, and she's like, I have no idea if they knew or not. It's very interesting. But there was one day, this is so funny. The teacher goes, okay, who here doesn't keep kosher at home? I'm about to raise my hand and look over at Flora, who's the other Russian kid, and she goes, "Keep my hand down." And Mark raised his hand. "Come with me." They took Mark out of the class. And when he came back a while later after they called in his parents, he was in tears.
Aw.
So, yeah.
I think part of the issue for parents like me is that we know what is wrong with the schools, and that's very easy to articulate, right? We're not seeing creativity. We are not seeing problem solving. It's the horseman machine. But
hold on. I think you'd also agree there's things that are wrong in the schools that you don't even pick up on, or that I wouldn't pick up on, that are working on a subliminal level that are truly malevolent, and it's just under the radar.
Like what? And do you believe there's a nefarious agenda behind it,
yes,
or it's just
of course
happening?
There's a nefarious agenda behind it. How could you just, how you know there's a nefarious agenda behind it? Because if you or I were chefs at a restaurant, and let's suppose we undercooked chicken, and some kid got really sick or God forbid died, we would lose our minds. And the first thing we do tomorrow is, all right, we are going through our process from beginning to end. This can never happen again. I don't know how I can look at myself in the mirror. This is absolutely unconscionable, right? Just once. Is that their reaction when these things start happening? Or is the reaction like, oh, it's not a big hand wave? Forget it. You're the one making it a problem.
And you see this with literacy rates, the deficiencies in literacy rates in the U.S. compared to other countries, even though the U.S. spends more money on education per student than basically everywhere else in the world. And all these failings that sweep through the public school system, you don't just take a look at it and say, hey, politicians definitely don't do this and say, hey, we need to rectify this. This can never happen again, as Michael Malice alluded to. Instead, they make excuses for it. And the answer is always give the teachers more pay, give the administrators more pay, spend more money. Let's get more taxpayer money for education. But that hasn't solved these deficiencies.
So
that's how you know it's not done in good faith.
What are those examples of things that you think people are not seeing that's happening, not that obvious? That's
showing completely inappropriate imagery to children. Like that's something
pornographic.
5 years ago, it would be like, this is going to happen. It's like, okay, you take off your tinfoil hat, Alex Jones. And what's amazing is not only is it happening, you're being told to your face, it's not happening. Where it's just like, you don't take my word for it. Here's the images. You can't even show them on TV. So that's the sort of thing that is malevolent, depraved.
So Elon Musk asked me this question. If there is a nefarious agenda, who is running the agenda in America's schools? Who is running this evil through our schools? Things that you think people are not seeing.
I think
American activists, communists. Is this communism attacking America?
The communists weren't evil in this sense. So there are the universities where the poisoning starts. I've said this from day one. You have a population of people who are trained in promoting insane demonic ideology. They go like moths to a flame to where those positions are made for them. And once they're there, they know what their job is and they know how to get in under the radar. And that's kind of how it works.
And who is training them? Is it a group?
The universities.
So who is informing the universities? Is it an individual? That's the question.
I don't think there is this, 1980s movie like Lex Luthor, big bad villain. I think it is decentralized in the sense that like there's not one person. If you took out George Soros or Alexander Soros tomorrow, this would not
go away.
It's not going away. Right. It's systemic.
And Malice is right to talk about the universities. In fact, there was a study some years ago that showed that 18% of U.S. university professors are self-described Marxists. And that is way overrepresentative than the general public. So it can't even be denied that the universities skew heavily left and heavily collectivist. A lot of those people are interested in things like cultural warfare, cultural Marxism, wealth inequality, whereas the general public is much more concerned about other things. So you see the poisoning that happens in the indoctrination of the school monopolies at that level. And once you kind of break free from that prison, you can really see the world in much more different ways. It's, those sorts of subjects are not things that entrepreneurs are gravitating toward.
Yeah. So what would you do if you had a kid going? Would you send them to a private school? Would you homeschool them? Would you send them to college? Would you be worried that if you don't send your kids through these institutions, they're not going to have a job? Society's not going to know what to do with them. That's the fear that parents have. I do believe that the silver lining of the lockdowns is that parents have been waking up. They're seeing that the schools are failing us. They're seeing the gender affirming care, the lowering of standards, the lowering of everything. But they don't really know what to do. They don't know what to do with their kids.
They're not waking up in huge numbers. Let's be honest. Okay. Let's take separate things. If you have a population that's homeschooled 15%, America's saved. Because you have 15% of the population that is conscious and has discernment, like you say, and can think for themselves, and they're like kind of self-aware of this, they're going to outnumber the mindless herds easily and run the table on them. So that's something I'm very hopeful about the future. In terms of what advice I'd give to parents, if I was a parent, first of all, going to college is still a credential. So no matter what anyone says watching this, if you have that Yale diploma, you're set for life. What I have been advocating for a long time is to seize all university endowments and distribute that money as reparations, because universities are the crystallization of privilege. I don't think that's going to happen, but I think there is increasing, and this is nothing anyone has to do. It is easier and easier for anyone to create their own business, including a kid, create a website, and start developing those skills and products. So not only are you going to have that independent wealth at an early age, and when you're 18, having $1,000, you're like loaded, right? But at the same time, if you're applying for jobs and I'm hiring someone with a, moderately good school, as opposed to I ran this online website for 4 years, who am I going to hire? It's going to be night and day. So I think that is going to lead to the increasing collapse of our university system. But it's never going to go away because it's always going to be a social credential.
Yeah, the university systems are powerful, and so are their lobbies. And, these two talked a little bit about silver linings recently, and it is true that in the U.S., homeschooling rates are essentially higher than they've ever been, or higher than they've been in a century, something like that. There is a lot of empirical data to kind of back that up. That is a good thing. You also saw a potential silver lining in the COVID regime is the closure of government schools. And I know a lot of parents weren't prepared for that and how to handle that with their child, especially when they had to work. They couldn't immediately decide to homeschool and things like that. That was a tumultuous thing for many families, but it also opened a lot of people's eyes to what was possible when you can break your student and your child free from the government education system. So a lot of the things that Michael Malice said are totally on point here. I'm totally with him. If we think that the government interferes needlessly in so many different market sectors, why shouldn't we think that about the education system? In fact, that might be the most important intervention to reverse in terms of government control. But let me know what you guys think in the comments. I want you guys to tell me, do you think that there's a new great awakening in terms of private schooling and homeschooling? Let me know in the comments below. And like we like to say, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, no more empire. Talk to you guys in the next one. Peace out.